Hey everybody, welcome back to When Harry Met Board Games, where we feed our people with relatable content and our victory condition is your satisfaction. I'm Harry, and today we have another top 10 list for you all. Today I'll be covering my top 10 deck building games, and I am so excited about making this list because deck building has to be one of, if not my favorite board game mechanism. I absolutely love the concept and the idea behind deck building, and honestly speaking, I had a good amount of games to pick from, and my top 5 or 6 were very easy, very simple to figure out. My 7, 8, and 9 were a little bit tougher, and then that final spot, that 10th spot, there was a good amount of games, maybe like 5 games, that were competing for this 10th spot. Without any further ado, let's get straight to that number 10, and that number 10 is Valley of the Kings, designed by Tom Cleaver and published by AEG Games. This game is a really cool deck builder because it's one of the smaller deck builders out in the market. It also has a revamped Kickstarter that just came out a few months ago, where they changed everything, redid it, new artwork, new graphic design, even different sized cards. I think it's tarot sized cards. But this one right here is the original, is the one that I have. Get straight to it. It's an Egyptian themed game where players have a starting hand of weak cards, or starting deck of weak cards, like in all deck builders, and they're building it up. But here, the market or the trade row that you're using to acquire cards is shaped in the form of a pyramid. And only the bottom row of the pyramid is immediately available to you for purchase. The other cards can be acquired in other ways, but also the cards you choose to purchase create a crumble effect, right? Where cards will lower down, right? At the end of the round, cards that are in the second level of the pyramid will lower down to the first level of the pyramid if you eliminated a card that's underneath it, and then the top card of the pyramid as well. Now, what's interesting about this game is that the cards can be used in a plethora of different ways. First of all, you can use them for their coin value in order to purchase the different cards that are in the trade row, or you can use it for its special ability. All of these cards have a special ability, but you cannot use both. You cannot do both the power and the ability. So making that decision is always so tough and challenging, and you got to factor that in. Also, a neat thing about this game is, the third thing that you can do with these cards is you stuff them in your tomb. You have a card at the beginning of the game that's called your tomb, and this is how you score points at the end of the game. This is technically deck deconstruction, because yes, you're acquiring lots of cards to empower your deck, but as the game progresses, you're also trying to get rid of some of those cards and put them under your tomb, because only the cards under your tomb will score. And then the way scoring takes place, it's an exponential set collection where cards will score within their respective colored sets, and you will score a multiple based on how many you have of those cards. So for example, if you have 5 yellow cards, you'll multiply 5 by 5 and you'll have 25 points for those, right? If you get all 7 blue cards, which is the highest valued set, then you'll multiply 7 by 7 and have 49 points for that. And you'll add all those points, and whoever's the winner, whoever has the most points is the winner. Really cool, really neat. It also has a solo variant that I found on AEG's website, that thanks to Tom Cleaver himself, the designer, who commented on a playthrough video that I did on the channel, he let me know that this is actually a fan-made variant that I guess AEG published on their website. Well, anyways, if you want to know more about this game, I have, like I said, made a playthrough of this game, so check out. I will have a link on the description below with a playlist of all the deck building games that I have covered in this channel. But right now, this is my number 10, Valley of the Kings. And now we move on to my number 9. And my number 9 is technically a tie, and it is Star Realms and Hero Realms. And here I have my Star Realms content, and here I have my Hero Realms content. And these are basically the same game with different themes. Star Realms is space theme, science fiction theme. Hero Realms is more of a fantasy theme. And they even have Shards of Infinity, which is a more recent implementation. It's like every time I get a newer one, there's more coming out. But for now, I'm just going to settle for Hero Realms and Star Realms. Really cool, neat deck building games where players are actually opposing one another and going against one another and trying to knock each other's life or authority, as the game refers to it, even though they have come up with cooperative ways of playing this game. I have a good amount of content for Star Realms just right here, and I have additional content for it that I haven't even opened up. Same thing with Hero Realms. Now, I will say this. These games, I like them, but at there's a good chance that they might actually climb up on this list once I play the Ruin of Thandor campaign deck for Hero Realms. I'm really excited about trying this. It basically turns Hero Realms into a cooperative campaign-like experience. I have been playing with different character packs that the game provides to differentiate players from one another, but up to now I've only been playing Hero Realms competitively. I am excited about playing this campaign deck, and again, I think that this might help it bump up, because even though it's just number 9 right now, it was actually very, very close between number 9 and number 8, and I think that this campaign deck might end up making the difference. I have not covered Hero Realms in any of my playthroughs, but I have covered Star Realms in a playthrough, so again, feel free to click on that link and check out that video. My number 9 deck building game of all time, Hero Realms and Star Realms. Now we move on to my number 8 deck building game of all time. And this is a big one. It's a heavy one. And it is the DC Comics deck building game designed by Matt Hyra and published by Cryptozoic Games. And this right here is the Multiverse box, which was a small crossover expansion, but it was also a big box to serve as a storage solution for the game. And this is where I have all of my content, and boy, do I have lots of content. I own almost everything that there's out there for this game. I think I'm 2 expansions shy of owning everything. And also, moreover, I have the Street Fighter spin-offs and the Lord of the Rings spin-offs in here as well. And this is a game I enjoy. I am a comic book nerd from days of old. I do enjoy comic books, Batman, Superman, Flash, and all them. I will admit I am more of a Marvel fan than a DC fan. But this game could be ranked higher if I enjoyed the game proper even more. Here's the thing. I do love the theme, even though the theme is very pasted on and it's just artwork and so on and so forth, and a little bit of correspondence between the superheroes, the supervillains, and their actual strengths, powers, abilities, and what the cards do. But the thing about this game that keeps it, first of all, I find it to be too simplistic. Here's the thing. This game it only has one currency. I like my deck builders with more currencies, right? So this game only has one currency. It's called power. I think the new rebranding of DC deck building introduces a second currency, which is some sort of movement currency. But here, right there, in this original game, there's only one currency. But I will say this. One of the reasons why it's at number 8, because it would have been actually been lower than number 8, is because I enjoy playing it with the Crisis mode. So basically, they have these 4 expansions called the Crisis packs. Crisis 1, 2, 3, and 4. And they make the game cooperative. Not only do they make the game cooperative, but they fix some of the problems, thematically speaking, the original game had, where you defeat villains and monsters and they go into your deck and you could use them and fight with them and what have you. In the Crisis mode, for the most part, when you defeat a villain or a supervillain, with the rare exception, those villains just go to the destroy pile and you do not interact with them in your deck. But also, I just like the teamwork and the actual Crises cards themselves, which add a little bit of a storyline feel, right? All of the Crisis cards are based on different actual comic book stories that took place. And they give you some sort of drive, some sort of direction. You're just not aimlessly purchasing cards in order to have the most victory points. You feel like you're trying to do something. And you're working together and collaboratively as a team in order to accomplish these things. So I do like that. Now, the one thing about the Crisis mode is that you cannot play it the way the rules suggest, because if you play the way the rules suggest, you are going to be playing a very long game. And for a deck builder, I'm sorry, I love deck building, but I like my deck building games to be concise and quick. It is far too long. So the way I do it is I've made some homemade house-ruled modifications to the deck construction and to the amount of villains and or crises that I include within the game. You could check out the link to my video. I have a playthrough video for this where I actually go into detail explaining my particular way of playing Crisis for solo or even for 2 players, and the modifications that I make in order to make it work for me. But once I make those modifications, and yes, that's a big caveat and that's a big asterisk on this number 8, once I make those modifications, I must say I really do enjoy playing this game, and the people who play with me, Crisis mode cooperatively, have also enjoyed this game immensely. Well, that is my number 8 deck building game of all time, the DC Comics deck building game. And now we move on to my number 7. And my number 7 is Paperback, designed by Tim Fowers. And this game here is basically the game of Scrabble meets deck building. And that is really, really cool, really neat. Now, for some people may not like building words or constructing words. They may not feel that their vocabulary or their lexicon is up to par. But even so, if you enjoy deck building, there's a good chance that you'll still enjoy this game mechanically. Because here's the thing, you don't need to have a thesaurus or a Webster's dictionary in order to play this game. You could have a very limited vocabulary. As a matter of fact, you can include ebonics, slang, whatever you want, and make this game work. Because again, mechanically speaking, it is very sound. There's so many cool things that the cards can do for you. The most interesting thing is you have to spell words with the letters you have in your hand, and only the letters you actually use for the words you construct count as money to purchase new letters, because you want to keep on buying additional letters, and or victory point cards, because you want to get those victory points. Ultimately, that's the goal of the game. And these cards have special powers, special abilities. And again, you can only activate the special abilities of the cards that you actually use to create your words. So sometimes you're making that decision of what I really want to create a word that has this letter because I really want to activate its power, right? So you might bypass another more obvious, simpler word and try to find a more complicated word or maybe a more obscure word, whatever, as long as it includes that specific letter that you need to be in the word in order to activate its power. Really, really cool. It has a nice, neat cooperative and or solo mode that you can use. So if you're afraid of intimidating someone who perhaps doesn't feel like they might be as articulate as you, or they might not be as well read as you, whatever it is, you can play with another person and say, hey, we're on a team and we'll help each other out. As a matter of fact, the competitive mode has a variant where you can help other players create words or see words, and you actually get a little bit of bonus. You get bonus cubes and they help you in different ways. So even the competitive mode encourages helping other players if you include that variant. Really cool. They do have some expansions for this game. They have the unabridged expansion. They have the spin-off called Hardback, which I think is a little bit more advanced, a little next step. But if you like deck building and if you like Scrabble or the idea of Scrabble, but you realize its limitations as an actual game, Paperback is a good game for you to consider. And this is another game that if you click on the playlist down below, you'll find that I've covered and done a solo playthrough of this. My number 7 deck building game of all time, Paperback. And now we move on to my number 6. And my number 6, and from this point on, guys, I love these games. I mean, it's hard for me to say that I do not love the previous four. I love them as well. But I really love the next 6. My number 6 deck building game of all time is Xenoshyft Onslaught. And this is another cooperative game. I've mentioned Paperback, Star Realms, and DC deck building game, which in and of itself are not cooperative games, but they've all come up with cooperative variants and or expansions. This game straight off the box is a cooperative game. You could play solo, and players are a group of a team trying to defend their base. This is a tower defense game in deck building mechanisms. And basically they're defending it from an onslaught of aliens that are divided into 3 different waves, right? Wave 1, 2, and 3. And there's 9 rounds in this game. Each 3 rounds correspond with one of those waves, which intensifies the power of the alien invasion, right? The first wave of aliens are much weaker than the second wave of aliens, who are much weaker than the third wave of aliens. So as you progress in the game and you acquire all this different equipment and armor and weapons and these different troops and units, and you make your deck more powerful, you're also going to encounter bigger challenges. And basically in this game, you're fighting for survival. That's all you're doing. You are just withstanding the onslaught. And if you survive 9 rounds, you will win this game. There is no other end game condition, no other objective in mind. You are just surviving. That tower is taking damage round by round, and you're just trying to destroy as many of these aliens as possible so that they can cause as little damage as possible to that tower. And if you still have even just 1 life left in that tower at the end of 9 rounds, you and your teammates have won that game. So it's really, really cool. There's some nice stuff going on. There's simultaneous play. Players are simultaneously acquiring their different cards. What's interesting is when you gain money. The currency in this game is Xenoshyft, and you gain that money as soon as the round begins, and it's straight in your deck. You're guaranteed to have money in your deck every round. You're gonna you don't have to pay to get more money. You just automatically get money at the beginning of the round, and you're using that money and you're spending it. And as soon as you buy these troop cards and these unit cards and these armor cards, as soon as you buy these cards and these weapon cards, you get to put them in your lane, and then your lane is gonna go against a lane full of alien bad guys, and you're gonna compare one by one, right? Moving on your lane from left to right, and the enemy's lane from right to left. You're gonna compare the two closest units to each other, their stats, their offense and their defensive stats, and see who withstands that battle until one character is eliminated or another. And then you rinse, wash, and repeat. You keep on going to that process until either all of the aliens have been eliminated and or of the heroes in your lane have been eliminated. And then if there's any enemies left in the lane, you add up their totals, their stats, you apply that damage to your base, and you move on to the next round. And what's interesting is there are troops and units that aren't even available for you during the earlier rounds. You need to wait and hold on for those later rounds to get those stronger reinforcements. Really cool, really fun, really difficult game, I must say. This game is hard. I've never won this game. As a matter of fact, this game plays 9 rounds. I've never made it past round 7, folks. And I still enjoy this game quite a lot. And if you want, again, this is another game that I've covered on this channel. I've covered on a playthrough. So please, if you want to click on that playlist down below, you'll find a playthrough of this game here, Xenoshyft Onslaught, my number 6 deck building game of all time. And now we move on to the top 5, as I usually say, the cream of the crop, even though Xenoshyft to me is pretty much cream of the crop material as well. My number 5 deck building game of all time, and this one might be many people's number 1. I think this is the highest ranked deck builder on BoardGameGeek.com. My number 5 deck building game of all time is Clank, a deck building adventure. And this is the original Clank, not Clank Legacy or Clank in Space. I haven't played those. This is published by Renegade Games. And the cool thing about Clank, I enjoy the fantasy theme. I enjoy the content of the cards. I enjoy the fact that it has multiple currencies. You want to talk about multiple currencies? There are 3 different currencies in this game that you're managing. You're managing your swords, which give you attack. You're managing your coins, which give you money to acquire things. And ultimately, finally, you're managing your boots, which allow you to move along the board because there's a spatial element to this game. And while some of these other games, including Xenoshyft and the few that I've yet to cover, do include some aspect of spatial movement and spatial orientation, Clank is a little bit different because the heart of the game is the players, their characters, their heroes, are moving through this dungeon. You're moving from spot to spot, trying to get to particular points in the dungeon to acquire different treasures, to acquire different loot, and get as much points as possible, and then escape before the dragon gets to you, or become the first player to make it all the way back to the castle. You're trying to figure all of these things out. And that part is really, really cool. But again, you're managing these 3 currencies, and it's so tough, honestly, when you're managing these 3 currencies to have as the perfectly balanced deck. You might be weak in some areas or another. You might not move as efficiently as you want to. You might not do battle as efficiently as you want to. You might not be able to acquire treasures and things like that as well or as efficiently as you would want to. And finally, there's also a additional currency of sorts, which is the Clank itself, right? Certain cards give you a negative currency, which is Clank. And it's basically the noise that you're making as you're secretly trying to explore that dungeon because you're afraid and terrified of waking up that big, bad, scary dragon. And as Clank, cards get played, you add the Clank cubes to a certain supply, and eventually when they're overflowed, they go into a bag. You draw them out, the dragon has woken, you randomly draw out some cubes, and the cubes that correspond with the player's colors, that equals damage you take as a player. So you can die as a player, which is something that, again, is very unique to deck building games. Even Xenoshyft, you don't die as an individual player. You only die as a team, basically. Your base dies. But here, you could die as a player, so that's something you got to factor in and manage as you're making your decisions throughout the game. Do I want to get that card? That card might be pretty good, but at the same time, it has too much Clank for me to risk it. Again, this is a fun game. I think it actually has a chance of going up higher if I would play it more in bigger groups. I've played this mostly 2-player, and at 2-player, it's not as exciting as I imagine it being with 3 or 4 players. So right now, it's still pretty good. My number 5 deck building game of all time, Clank. Now we move on to my number 4. My number 4 is actually pretty new to me, so it has a good chance of climbing up with more play. My number 4 deck building game of all time is Shadowrift, designed by Jeremy Anderson. And this game is it's a village defense game. Xenoshyft is a tower or base defense game. Here you have a village defense game. And basically you have a board that represents your village. And basically it just organizes all the different decks in this game. This game has so many decks. This game has so many moving parts. It is absolutely, without a doubt, the most complex and heavy out of these 10 deck building games. Because deck building games, for the most part, normally, they're not really heavy games. They may not necessarily be gateway games, but they're definitely not heavy. This game is pretty heavy. It reminds me a lot of Robinson Crusoe in that regard. There's so many moving parts that early on, when you're first learning the game, you're pretty certain to make a mistake or two, right? You're going to overlook something rules-wise because there's so many things to keep upkeep and maintenance. But once you get past that little hiccup, once you get past the hump of figuring it out and making sure you're doing things right, it is a very satiating and satisfying experience. This is a fantasy-themed game. Again, players all take the role of heroes. It's a cooperative game, kind of like Xenoshyft. There is a little bit of a trend here of me liking games that either play cooperatively or have some sort of cooperative variant with deck building. Players are building up their heroes and they're trying to withstand these different monsters that are attacking the village. All the meanwhile, they have a village deck of cards and a village row, town row, and there's villagers there. And little by little, the monsters are killing them and replacing them with corpses, right? Dead bodies. And one of the ways of losing is if your town that accommodates 5 different cards at a time has all 5 of them are corpses, you have lost the game, right? So you got to make sure that you have villagers. Luckily for you, there's a travelers deck, which includes travelers that will be coming to the city. Some of these travelers are up to no good. They're bad guys who will freely go into your city, infiltrate it, and cause problems. But some of those villagers are good citizens that will be helpful additions to your town, but you have to pay in order to get them. So you're paying cards all the meanwhile to build your deck. But every once in a while, you need to pay currency to acquire town villagers for your town and to acquire walls for protection in your town. So that makes it so challenging because ideally you would just want to build your deck with, spells and equipment and weapons in order to fight and defeat the bad guys. But if you do all of that and you don't address your village at all with walls and with villagers, then you're going to lose the game because eventually your town will be filled with corpses. So you got to manage all that stuff. You're constantly acquiring wounds because every time you do melee combat with an enemy, if you don't do range combat, every time you do melee combat, you're incurring wounds and those wounds clog up your deck. So you're constantly managing this idea of culling your deck from all these trashy cards and at the same time still trying to have enough money to get some good equipment, get some good spells, and yet still have enough to keep the villagers and the walls in your town or village deck in order to hold back the losing of this game. Such a challenging game. Again, I've not won at this game. It is a very, very hard game. I'm thinking of implementing some house rules and things like that in order to give myself a chance as I get better in this game to perhaps experience the taste of victory. But for now, really fun, rich experience. My number 4 deck building game of all time, Shadowrift. And now we move on to my number 3. And my number 3 is another big box here. And that is Thunderstone Quest, designed by Mike Elliott and published by AEG Games. This is the 3rd iteration. There was Thunderstone, there was Thunderstone Advance, and then there's Thunderstone Quest. And I believe this is the one that's lasted the longest concurrently in print. This game has, 3 years, I think, now in print, which is pretty impressive because for whatever reason, the first 2 iterations kind of went out of print relatively quickly. But this game is a fantasy-themed dungeon crawl almost of a game, at least this iteration is, because the board consists of two sides. You have your village and you have your dungeon. And each turn you're making your decision. Am I going to the village or am I going to the dungeon? There's occasional exceptions to the rule that allow you to do both in the same turn, but for the most part, you're picking one or the other. And if you're going to the village, you're doing things like healing or acquiring weapons or learning spells or recruiting heroes, right? Or just getting food and potions to help you for the journey in the dungeon. And then you go to the dungeon and it's pretty self-explanatory. You're going there to fight some baddies. And there's a level 0 dungeon, a level 1 dungeon, a level 2 dungeon, a level 3 dungeon. And depending on where you're going to the level, you're going to, what level of dungeon you're going into, you're going to need a certain amount of lanterns or light to get you there, because the deeper you get into the dungeon, the darker it gets, you know, right? It's pretty thematic in that regard. And you're going to need those lights and lanterns to get you deeper in. Also, the further you go into the dungeon, the more challenging these bad guys become. And not only do their health increase, but their special abilities increase. And of course, also their reward increases, because ultimately you're trying to beat these bad guys to get experience points. And your experience points help you twofold, because your experience points help you go back to the village and level up your characters that start as level 0 and level 1 characters, help them level up to level 2 and level 3 characters, which are much more powerful. But they also help you out because ultimately your experience points are your victory points, right? And some of the cards that you have in your deck give you victory points. Again, defeating those monsters give you experience points tokens. And at the end of the game, whoever has the most wins the game. Really cool. There is a big baddie overlord at the end of each quest that you have a chance to fight if you so wish, to gain lots and lots of experience points. And you're just trying to build your deck efficiently and manage that balance of knowing when to go to the village, knowing when to go to the dungeon, and figuring out what combination of weapons and spells and items work best with which heroes, right? Which heroes do you want to recruit? Which classes and which races of heroes do you want to recruit in your deck? And what kind of proportion do you want to recruit them? Figuring that all out is so cool, so brilliant. Love this game, really exciting, great components, great artwork. My number 3 deck building game of all time, Thunderstone Quest. And now we move on to my number 2. And my number 2 is Dominion, the grandfather of all deck building games. And yes, for some people, this game has gotten old. It is antiquated. It is outdated. It is played out. But not for me. I still enjoy playing Dominion. Yes, thematically speaking, it's almost non-existent. It's just a bunch of artwork on cards, and sometimes not even the prettiest of artwork. But mechanically speaking, it is so sound. It is so streamlined. It is such a smooth experience. I guess this is the one deck building game in my list that I probably would consider a gateway game. DC deck building probably too, if the theme was more generic, I guess. But this game here, it's so cool. Like, this game never, if you don't have attack cards, it never goes past 30 minutes. And it's so, there's no analysis paralysis, because you always have a static row of 10 cards, kingdom cards, that are available for you. So you should know at the end of your current turn what you're going to buy your next turn. You might be debating between 2 cards or what have you, but there is no tactical response-oriented decision, because chances are the players who went before you didn't do anything to alter the market drastically, and the cards that you want should still be available for you. So again, this leads to very, very quick turns, very, very little downtime in between turns, and a very, very quick game experience. Now, again, the attack cards can add some length and make the game drag a little bit, which is why I seldom play with attack cards. I play with them every once in a while because I do like to get my content out there. But for the most part, I play attack free. And there's so much content. I haven't even, scratched the surface. And even so, I've played many, many expansions, and there's a bunch more that I own. My number 2 deck building game of all time, Dominion. And now we move on to my number 1. And my number 1 deck building game of all time is Marvel Legendary. This game, designed by Devin Lowe and published by Upper Deck Entertainment. Really cool game. Marvel theme, as I mentioned, I'm a comic book nerd, and I'm more of a Marvel guy than a DC guy. But even mechanically speaking, this is such a better game than DC deck building. Because, first of all, when you defeat the villains, they don't go into your deck. That's really cool. The game, straight off the bat, without any expansion, has a cooperative way of playing it. And there's a rich story to this game. There's schemes, right? And the schemes basically make the winning conditions of the game different from game to game. They make the losing conditions different from game to game. But they also alter the cadence and the flow of each game. Each game is going to flow differently based on the scheme that you choose randomly or at will. And there's so much variety between the masterminds that can combine with those different schemes in different ways that make the game easier, harder, more interesting. There's so much content with villain groups, with henchmen, with the heroes themselves. They've got sidekicks, they've got bystanders, they got shield officers. They have, wounds even that do different things. There's so much stuff going on in this game. And again, so much content. I am so behind in this game. I've given up on the prospect of trying to own everything. But again, I own a good amount of this game, and I never grow tired of playing it. My number one deck building game, which by the way, I also covered, check on that playlist down below. I also covered with a playthrough on this channel. My number one deck building game of all time, Marvel Legendary. And that's it, folks. Those are my top 10 deck building games of all time. Please comment down below. Tell me what's your favorite deck building game. Perhaps you love this genre as much as me. Perhaps you loathe it. And I'm sorry that I had to put you through this torture of watching this video in that case. All right, everybody. This is Harry from When Harry Met Board Games saying take care, everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy, and have fun gaming. Bye-bye.